high-end archtop jazz guitar to work on. You'll recall the Grimm Brothers D'Angelico copy recently that involved putting some pickups where there were none previously. This one is like the opposite. Someone modded this in the past for pickups that are different from the ones it came with, and this job is going to entail restoring wood that was removed so that we can outfit it again with humbuckers. This happens to be an L5 CES from 1977. That stands for Cutaway Electric Spanish. And it's based on Gibson's top-of-the-line archtop. The L5 had been the cream of the crop since it was introduced way back in 1922. 1951, they were ready to outfit it with pickups to join the modern age. Ironically, in this case, the ones that they put on 1950s guitars were similar to the ones that are on this one, but by the 70s they were very different. These ones happen to be staple P90s. It's pretty rare to see a staple P90 in the bridge position, because they're pretty bright. But there's a lot of interesting stuff going on in this guitar. To begin with, we have to understand that this is a very, very expensive instrument. It's not the kind of thing that people usually go messing around with very much, because these are almost ready-made collector's guitars. They don't produce many in any given year, and people who are in the market for these things generally want them stock. And they're usually babied and, they're someone's prized possession. So you don't see very many mods. This is the quintessential modern jazz guitar. Wes Montgomery played one. To be honest, very few serious jazz guitarists could actually afford them. In the 50s, these were over $600, when you could pick up a Les Paul for less than $250. So this is the flagship model, the ultimate expression of the guitar maker's art. This one now has got a Bigsby tailpiece on it. You know why? The previous owner, whoever he was, decided that he didn't like the shiny gold plating on the iconic L5 tailpiece and sanded it all off. Real gold. Now it's back to bare metal. Can you believe that? I mean, these things alone go for $800 to $1,000 a piece, if you can find one. So, it is to laugh. I haven't actually investigated what it would cost to get one of those things replated. So, current owner wants to get rid of the staples and put on some good old PAF style humbuckers like it would have had from the factory. That's going to involve inlaying some wood and disguising stuff, because humbuckers employ a different size and shape of routed recess, and odds are we would end up seeing some of what's going on under here, and definitely the screw holes. There are also some cracks that have been repaired, but they're pretty obvious. And there's also a seam separation on the back. I don't think these are humidity related. I think it suffered some trauma. They've been fixed, but they're a little too obvious, so we're going to try and disguise them. Let's do a quick sound test. Action on this feels weird to me, like it's stiffer on the treble side than it is on the bass, and wow, that is 2.5 64ths and 3 on the treble. Yeah, I would want to raise it on the bass side a little bit, I think. There were some odd buzzes and stuff you could hear as well, which could be a consequence of the super low action on the bass side, but I also think the neck might be too straight. There's very, very little relief. 2000s? Yeah, so I think we want to loosen the truss rod off just a little bit, and then we can sort of get a better picture of what's actually going on. It's at the point where the rattles I'm hearing are not actually caused by high frets, potentially. The nut has been shimmed, and the nut height is fine, so we're getting like rattles and buzzes from the string envelope or excursion of the string as it vibrates. Yeah. So yeah, Yeah, that's just low. That's just low action. Okay, before I took the strings off, I took some measurements in terms of string height, sort of at the front edge of these pickups here, to give me some guidelines. When I'm putting the new pickups in, I might have to add a riser or shave them down or something. Just sort of get me in the ballpark. Having a quick look through the sound hole, it would be really nice if these pickups had splices in their leads on their way to the switch so that the wires could be accessed through the pickup holes. I don't think that's the case. Which means, unfortunately, we're probably going to have to take this switch out. And these three-ways with the rubber grommet, I think we ran into one of these a few years back. Some research told me that while they're designed to isolate the switch from errant vibrations running through the top, which can kind of make a sort of a rather large sound, kind of a reverby, kind of a twang thing that happens when you switch positions sometimes. But in my experience, these are quite difficult to get switches in and out of. So we'll do our best. It's got to come out anyway. Okay, we can see the underside of the staple P90, which has individual screws for each of the staples, as it were, the pairs of magnets, and they act to lower and raise them. This has individual ground wires between each pair of those. That's kind of interesting. Never looked at the underside before. So this is from these are Seymour Duncan custom shop pickups. Yeah, so in this design we've got the pickup leads going to the volume pot rather than to the switch, which means everything's got to come out to swap these pickups. You've got to take off the tailpiece to release the grounding wire, and also just because it'll make things easier. These screws are incredibly tight, almost as if there were no pilot holes drilled, which is just absolutely foolish in a guitar like this. No, seriously, I'm keeping as much pressure on the head as I can. They're long screws, too. No, this is not installed by someone who understands woodworking. It's a wonder the block didn't crack. Different pots. This one has a piece of black electrical tape there for some reason. In terms of hardware here, we've got one original branded Gibson pot for the bridge volume, two replacement CTS pots. These have date codes from 1995, which we might surmise is when this whole operation took place and the change happened. And we've also got an alpha pot for the bridge tone. That has a different shaft diameter, of course. However, it does seem to have the same... No, it doesn't. It's got the larger knurling pattern. Oh well. We also have a double-sprung stereo type output jack, which seems to have come from a different guitar, as it once had solder on that lug there. It's currently wired up in mono. That's fine. We'll go on and desolder the leads here. We'll put that away for the time being while I work on the finish and such. And these are standard humbucker pickup rings, and you can see that the holes from the P90 dog ears are outside the outline here. So we're going to have to patch those up, fill them. The actual outline, boy, comes real close, but we got kind of lucky. I mean, there's still going to be an indent in the finish, but it's not too bad, and on a black guitar I think we can live with it. Got some maple dowel here, which is about 3.5 millimeters, which I think will work pretty well to fill in the sort of countersink that happened around these holes. If this was a guitar that was finished in clear lacquer or amber or something, I'd obviously be using a different material, probably doing it side grain. Because it's black, we can use end grain here. It's not going to be a problem. Looking at the back side of the crack running up to the F-hole in the mirror there, we can see that it has been cleated and it has been glued. Here's the seam separation on the back, which has also been glued up together. Really want to degrease the surfaces, make sure they're good and clean before I start doing finish work on top of them. Then I'm going to lightly sand with some 1200 grit wet dry paper, used dry, to provide a surface for the new lacquer to key onto. This is some slightly thinned nitro lacquer with some black dye. Now, most black dyes will look a little bit blue, which I don't want, so I usually end up adding a tiny drop of amber or brown to it, which will better mimic the effect of an aged black lacquer that's had 45 years of time to oxidize. Here I'm doing the drop fills. I'm just filling these divots with the lacquer. I want it to be fairly loose, fairly liquid, so it has a good chance to burn in or re-amalgamate with the previous old coat of lacquer. Several coats, and I'll sand a little bit every once in a while just to knock down the high surfaces. I'll add some more. In the meantime, while all that's going on, I can also polish and polish and polish the frets. This guitar has a Gretsch style strap button on the neck end, and it has no interior support. See, just pokes through the side. So I have to carefully unscrew the little stud, which is double-ended. It's got screws on both sides, and I'll make a small support block that will go in there. It'll provide some stability and insurance, because this is a rather big, expensive guitar, and you wouldn't want that strap button to fall out or for the side to crack. I'm just cinching it up from the outside using a little tuner clamp here. It takes a long time for lacquer drop fills to cure. I mean, they'll solidify fast, but the stuff continues to shrink for a long time. And in a case like this, where I've put on enough to make up for that full thickness of missing finish, if I wait 3 days and sand it, it's going to continue to shrink back, and I'll end up with serious divots appearing in short order. It's still a risk even if you wait 2 or 3 weeks. So in the interim, I'm going to try and fit the pick guard and hopefully get things ready to put the electronics in. In the guitar case, there was a baggie full of gold screws and other assorted hardware, which I was assuming came from the original pickup installation, which I've subsequently realized are not, because they're all mismatched. I've got round-headed screws, countersunk screws, screws of various lengths and different diameters. Unfortunately, none of them are actually the right length or diameter to go in the pickup rings, so I've had to put some on order. I want to see if this guard is going to work, or if I have to make a new one. I don't think I will. This one appears to be designed for use with the humbuckers. There are a couple of brackets, neither of which seems to be the one that was previously installed, as the screw holes don't really line up, but I think I can make this one work. Looking at historical 70s examples, I've seen a bunch of different guards, actually. The Sunburst guitars tend to have tortoise plastic, as do some of the black ones, which can look a little funny, actually. Black guitar with a brown guard. Dimensionally, they all seem to be a little bit thinner than what was on the earlier examples. This one here that came with it is not bound. It's more like what you would find on a 50s ES-225 or something. It's got that beveled black, white, black thing, which is easier to manufacture. It's the tuxedo effect. You know, black on black and white. It looks fine. And it does seem to have been cut to fit properly. These ones, rather than slotting around the pickup rings, like you'd find on a Les Paul, they sit right on top of the plastic. which, that's why we got these little cutouts here for the height adjustment screws for the humbucker. That can be a little bit annoying depending on your picking habits because there isn't as much clearance. It doesn't sit very far below the height of the strings. I'll just use some placeholder screws until the gold ones come in. Yeah, I know this video isn't going to get uploaded on time. The house next door is getting some major renovations done. They're adding a second story. And as I live in a densely packed urban environment, there's like literally 2 feet between the wall of my house, built 1890, and theirs. So the working guys are down in the basement breaking it up to pour new footings. And they must have not sharpened the jackhammer or something because it's taking forever. Days. When they get bored of that, they come upstairs and they rev up the reciprocating saws to cut through all the framing. I can't film video or edit while this is going on because like the whole house is shaking. And I'm trying to get this done at night, but of course sleeping during the day is out of the question because of the racket. It's just a joyful experience. Seemed like there have been a couple of different screw holes for different riser systems here. Also really deep indentation from whatever the first one is. I don't know. This has got some felt on the bottom. Do I like that? I think you may actually have to move about 1.5 millimeters downrange. For the neck pickup here, they got a little bit ambitious in terms of the carving, and I'm going to have to somehow reconstruct this area as there's nothing left for the screws to bite into. And I think I'm going to use epoxy putty for that. So I kneaded up the putty, stuck it in place roughly, then carved it back using a chisel and files. This stuff gets pretty darn hard. It's not that easy to cut, but it works. I then have to check and make sure there's enough lateral wiggle room to make this thing fit properly in the right spot. And of course it didn't, so I had to cut a little bit of the excess epoxy away. Here I'm using a handheld drill, a jeweler's drill, to do the pilot holes. And you can see how close we were, basically half on the existing wood, half off. And I will sand the pickup ring a little bit to give me a better angle. This stuff takes unforeseen hours, literally. I don't like the way this guard sits because this bracket here, it's not angled in a way that this can ever meet gracefully. So there's always going to be something flapping around. And frankly, I just know that when I get this thing with strings on it, that your finger is going to bump up against the edge here. It's inelegant. I can't leave it like this. I got to cut around them. Which means marking everything and figuring out where to do the cuts. There's some measurement and some eyeballing, some guesstimation. After I figured out the position, I drilled some 1/4-inch holes. Actually, they were 6 millimeters in the corners, and I'll join those up with a score mark with a scalpel, saw things out with the jeweler's saw, and file to fit. I'm liking the positioning a little bit better now. I'll go ahead and rough up the surface and apply a generous daub of epoxy to the bracket and hold things in place. You can see that there's an angle there that the epoxy sort of takes up. The lacquer is getting harder, so I can use a razor blade scraper and then sand up to about 2400 grit, and then use polishing compound with a foam pad. Make things shine. Still there, but better than it was. Before I reinstall the electronics, I'll make sure they get a good blast of cleaner. I'll spray some into each of the pots and then rotate the shaft to both distribute and flush. Rather than connect the pickups directly to the pots, I've decided to use a length of cable that will make the connections accessible through the pickup cavity for future convenience. To help pull the harness back into position, I'm tying dental floss around a couple of the shafts, which has been threaded through their respective holes. I do the same thing with the jack, using a length of wire and a salvaged male jack barrel. Once they're pulled up, I can put the washers and nuts on. It's the same for the selector switch, though in this case, with a simple acceptance of some contusions, I can sort of hold it in place while tightening the nut. That's not always possible. I'll make the pickup connections, cover that over with some shrink tubing. Cable ties and wire clips are helpful in maintaining some sense of orderliness. You don't want the stuff flopping around too much inside the guitar. Here's a little piece of foam for the pick guard. This little device here is called the Vibramate, which does away with having to, on a Bigsby tailpiece, bend the string around and hook it on the tiny little string post there. It transforms the operation into that, which is quite a bit easier and less frustrating to many people. Well, there we have it. If you're going to play a 17-inch archtop jazz guitar, this is the model. There are variations, but this is pretty much the source material. It's looking pretty good for a 45-year-old guitar. I will say the lacquer touch-up was way more annoying than I thought it would be. The finish on the guitar here really didn't want to melt and blend with the new lacquer, even with the addition of some thinners to sort of heat it up and make it amenable. But there are slight witness lines, or a boundary between the new finish and the old. That's something I haven't experienced very often with Gibson lacquer. But the old cracks are now less visible. They're all black now rather than white. The other thing is the finish on this is very thin and washboarded. So sanding this stuff level was a real kind of bite your tongue experience. And I actually managed to sand through to the bare wood on one of the pickup screw holes. It had come up sort of from the pressure of the screw going in. I guess it was a little bulge there. So I saw bare wood cursed and then put some more lacquer on it. And I'm waiting for that to harden up a bit more. I don't have the jazz chops to show this thing off to its best, obviously. You guys know that. All I can really do is just sort of make some sounds with it. But it's very pretty. It's got a nice neck. It's got big 70s, sort of 70s era jumbo frets, which aren't as big as modern jumbos, but bigger than what they had in the 50s. So let's plug it in.